Welcome to Upfront. I'm Mary Ruth Snyder. Our guest today is Madison Stewart, and she is the coordinator for the Strathcona Food Hub, at least for another week or so. More on that later. So we are going to talk today about food security and what that means for you and your families, and how you can make a difference moving forward in your own lives. Because of course we are all faced with astronomical inflation for food pricing, and also the fact that here on Vancouver Island, we have a supply chain potential issue. We all felt it during the floods of 2021 when it wiped out all of the highways, and we were struggling for weeks not getting the food that normally would come to Vancouver Island. So, but before we dig into all of that detail, we're going to start with just getting to know Madison a little bit, because you're going to see a lot of her moving forward. Hi, Madison.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm pretty good.
Good. Now, Madison, before we dig into what it is you currently do and what you're about to be doing, which will encapsulate what you are currently doing, let's talk about where your journey began. Sure. Are you a BC girl, or did you come from afar?
No, born and raised here in Campbell River.
Really?
Yes.
So your roots run deep?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what high school did you go to?
I went to Timberline.
Timberline, okay.
Yeah, graduated in 2012.
Okay.
And then took off to the University of the Fraser Valley in Abbotsford, BC, where I studied community development and international relations. And here we are, working in food security, very much related to community development. But there's, some story to how we've gotten here.
Yes. Now, when you were in university, studying those two things, like to me, the community development and the international relations, how did those come together, and how did you decide as you moved forward with your own career to focus more on the community development and less on the international relations?
Right. So I think one way to explain community development versus international relations, because you can bring community development throughout the world, right? In every country, every community has their own development goals. International relations are kind of the macro scale of that. So what do governance models, how do they develop their communities or their nations? I focus more on the micro scale because I think you see bigger change in that way. But the policy side of things has definitely been intertwined into my work as well. Okay, awesome. Now, post-graduation, so your bachelor's is in that. Yeah. Did you do anything after that? No, I've taken subsequent courses postgraduate in community planning and public relations.
Okay, yeah. Awesome. Now, how long have you been in the role of the Strathcona Food Hub coordinator?
Since October 2021.
Okay. And what was the essence of that role, and why did that come together? Because that was a new role when you took it over.
So United Way BC, they have what's called the Regional Community Food Hubs programming. Okay. So they've gone into regions, and their region definition is a little bit different throughout our province. I understand it as being related to population. So the Strathcona Food Hub is all of Strathcona, including the islands, out to Cayucit. But some of these other food hubs in, the lower mainland might just be a neighborhood.
Oh, okay.
So they have this program, and you apply with a pretty comprehensive business case every March, actually. Okay. And in that business case, you show that you have a mandate to further along food security initiatives in the region. Okay. And it's considered a hub model because you have spokes, they call it. So these are maybe grassroots organizations that are working on one or two programs around food security. Okay. And then the main hub kind of acts as a coalition of those folks that come together and meet and work on capacity building.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with the Strathcona, could you give us a specific example? So you're technically the hub, but what would the spokes be in our region?
So the spokes in our region would be the food banks. So we have a couple, I'm not sure if unregistered is the right term, but we have a couple community food banks on Cortez, Quadra Island.
Okay.
We obviously have the Campbell River and District Food Bank in Campbell River.
Yep.
Those would be considered spokes of the hub, as well as our Hama-Alis Community Kitchen and the Linnea Farm Society on Cortez. And then there's lots of smaller groups like in Sayward where they're developing a group of folks that are interested in growing more food locally and also distributing food to low-income folks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, one of the past statistics that I have heard repeatedly, and you can update it, is that 50 years ago on Vancouver Island, we grew 95% of our own food and only imported about 5%.
Yeah.
And now, in today, that has switched, and now we import 95% of our food and only grow 5%. Is that still accurate?
I think the most current statistics are actually closer to like 1 or 2%
of what we grow ourselves.
Of what we grow ourselves, yeah. So we're importing almost everything we eat, and it actually is a sliding scale based on income. So lower income families, they're more likely to be eating 100% imported foods just because of where we grocery shop, where we buy our food, the fact that processed food is a lot cheaper than buying fresh fruits and vegetables.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that would speak to why we had such an issue when all the highways were washed out in the, what was it called, the atmospheric river that took us out for about a week, and it killed all the highways, and then it caused all the kerfluffle it killed the supply chain, and I understand that there was a lot of effort with all the CEOs of the grocery stores, and they found a route up through Prince Rupert to ship the food down through Port Hart. Like, what a crazy, crazy time. And so coming out of that, I remember a big push amongst the conversations to, all right, we got to start growing our own food. Has that lasted over the last 18 months, or has that now dispersed again?
Well, I'll say in my work, I continuously see more things like a CSA box. So, community supported agriculture.
Okay.
So people will grow a surplus of fruits and vegetables in their backyards, and then either work with an organization to distribute those fruits and vegetables in the community, or set up their own system. So we see these programs kind of bottling up in different communities where people are growing food and they realize that if I'm already growing this, I should grow a little bit more. And there's similar box models with actually seafood. So community-supported fishermen. And they will put their catch in a box. It's kind of like a subscription model. I think the turn to growing more food is, young people don't have a lot of spare time. Young people can't afford a lot of land. Not that you need a ton of land to grow food. And there's also a big startup cost. I started my own garden 3 summers ago, and I think the startup cost with soil and beds and such was over $500. So I just don't think it's super attainable for all young people to be growing their own food, or seniors who might have more time to be growing their own food.
Yeah.
And I definitely think it takes some heart, it takes some passion to really want to get your hands in the soil.
Yeah.
And watch it. It's also not something that happens quickly. Right.
Yeah. I think speaking to the quickness thing, I think with social media, we as a society in general have become attuned to instantaneous response, instantaneous anything. Mm-hmm. And when it's not instantaneous, it's like we get bored with it or something. I don't know how to explain it, but I understand that. Like before we started the show, we were talking about how in the past, when we had multi-generational homes, where you had grandparents and parents and children and often grandchildren all living together, there was almost everybody had a garden of some sort, growing something. Mm-hmm. And we've lost the multi-generational home, but now I think we actually might be moving back to that because of the high housing costs that we're seeing across the country, which is not a bad thing. The housing costs are a very bad thing, but moving back to a multi-generational home is not such a bad thing because it provides support both for the elderly and also for the young. Like mm-hmm. it's a really beneficial relationship across the generations. And it would allow for the one person who is staying at home to tend the garden. And if everybody's participating in that, you might see more gardens coming. Now, do you think there's a role for the Strathcona Regional District and the municipalities around BC to be more engaged in providing pieces of land for community gardens? Like, is that part of the answer?
I mean, I think it is part of the answer. In Campbell River, our community gardens are primarily managed by Greenways Land Trust, but they have been supported by the City of Campbell River in the past, and they're currently oversubscribed too, so there is a waiting list to have a community plot. It is pretty regular now to be seeing these newer apartment buildings developing a community garden alongside their apartments.
Really?
Yeah, and I've seen even in supportive housing models, it's been part of their plans as well. I can't speak to how successful they've all been, but it's something that's becoming more common.
Okay. Now, at the top of the show, I mentioned that you're in this role as the Strathcona Food Hub coordinator for another week, and then you're transitioning to a new role. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, so I was recently hired as the Strathcona Regional District's Community Health Network Coordinator. It's an interesting position, and as I understand it, it's a dual responsibility to report to the regional district as well as a table of partners, which brings together organizations across Strathcona that basically leaders of those organizations that form a table of partners that help make decisions and plan priorities for the coordinator.
And how does the Food Hub fit into, will you still have some sort of an oversight role with the Food Hub?
Yeah, so food security is a huge part of the Community Health Network's mandate.
Okay.
So I won't be leaving that work, and I intend to do that work on the side a little bit in the transition phase as well. Like I said, the United Way business case is due this month, so that's something I'm not going to be abandoning. I got to get that in and hopefully have someone replace me in the next couple of months here that I can work with and set them up well.
So I think it's really interesting that you've been in this role for 2 years now, and you're also going to be able to kind of have it dovetail with your new work as well. I think it's all interconnected. So what would you say for the people watching, what should their priority be, if at all possible?
I think most people can say this, and I think a lot of people on Vancouver Island are already invested in, voting with your dollar. So when you go to the grocery store and you see something that's a little bit more expensive, but it is grown in BC, think about the repercussions of completely buying into our import culture, and try to be diverse with how to feed yourself. Try and eat seasonally. I wrote an article for the Strathcona magazine we have here about not eating pineapples in December. I think we can strive to be more sustainable in what we're eating by eating more close to what is appropriate in our season and eating food that's grown closer to home.
Is there, on the Strathcona Food Hub website, is there information such as that people can access as a resource?
We don't actually have a website right now.
Okay.
We have some press releases and information that's held on the United Way BC website.
Okay.
And we also have a webpage on the Strathcona Regional District's Health Network website. So it would be nice to have a pointed website just for the hub, but we're just not there yet.
Okay. All right. Moving forward, where do you think the education needs to happen to help people of all ages understand the crisis that we find ourselves in right now and how to get ourselves out of it?
I think our BC teachers are doing a really great job. We're already asking too much of them, but some of them are invested enough to take on gardens in schools and teach their students about, growing food and processing food into things that are a little bit more exciting than just a pea or microgreens. I think there's a lot of chefs in our community as well that are really focused on purchasing local food, and that can make the topic a lot more fun for people. And it's a whole spectrum. So like you said, educating the entire community at every age level, at every income level, that is a difficult thing to do. One thing we do need from our community governance is an agriculture plan, so more incentives for people to buy property to grow more food. We could compare ourselves to the Comox Valley. They're growing quite a lot of food and having it distributed across the community in a very accessible way.
Okay.
And I think we could be a little bit more like them if we had that buy-in from our local government.
Okay. There was an opportunity I had probably, 6 or 7, 8 years ago now, talking to a farmer in the Comox Valley, and she and her husband had purchased a 26-acre farm, but 8 acres of it they were keeping in forest because the forest is where all the insects and the bees live, and that's really important for farming. And then they do all the farming by hand. And so they started out the first couple of years with simply 1 acre in actual produce, but that 1 acre translated into $80,000 of income.
Wow.
So intense farming by hand, it keeps your costs down, but your yield is actually quite good. And so I think, like you mentioned earlier, you don't need a lot of land to be able to grow a lot of food. Like a 10 by 10 plot, you can get a lot out of that, especially zucchinis. Zucchinis grow on the island like crazy. You can get like 1 strip of zucchinis will give you like 25, which will feed you for the whole year. So what will be your main focus moving forward in the next, say, 3 months? Have you zeroed in on what that will be and what the community focus will be for you?
Yeah, well, I'm working on a couple things that are in development right now. One that has a strong Campbell River focus is a growers and producers webpage. So there's actually one on Quadra, there's one in the Comox Valley. When you go to the farmer's market, they'll hand you a brochure that says, we actually have a lot more farmers than come to our farmer's market, and this is how you can reach them.
Yep.
So a lot of farmers choose to have a farm stand or, answer the phone and say, what would you like? Instead of taking every Sunday off or working every Sunday, attending the farmer's market, and selling food.
Okay.
And in smaller communities, just another interesting point on that is I've heard from smaller community farmers, they don't want to bring all their food to the farmers market because then it leaves the community. So interestingly enough, if you're a tourist, say on Cortez, you might not have access to all that local food because they actually want it to go to community members.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I had never thought about that particular aspect of it. Like the Comox Valley Farmers Market has been so long established now. They have a huge number of people that come. But that's really interesting that they have that list. So that's something you're going to do here in Campbell River.
Yeah, we're working on that right now.
Okay.
Actually, someone came to me from the community that saw the brochure and said we should have this in Campbell River. And back in 2014, there was what they called a food map that the city of Campbell River actually organized, but it hasn't been updated since. So we're working to update that and take ownership of it in the next 6 months.
Okay, and that's under the Food Hub?
Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. Now, so that's one of the projects. What's the focus going to be over the next 6 months, say, with the schools? Are you doing any direct work with the schools in Campbell River?
We don't do any direct work with the schools, but Greenways Land Trust is a spoke of the hub, and they have a part-time education staff member that works with school-age children and goes into schools and teaches about growing food, but their mandate is bigger than food. It's on conservation and other climate issues. So that they're kind of our contact that does some of the schoolwork. We also are really involved with capacity building for school lunches, and the province has actually injected a lot of funding into increasing that program to include take-home food. So we're trying to develop what that could look like in our community, what it's looked like in other BC communities.
And would that essentially be locally grown food that's given out through like a lunch program, like a salad bar kind of thing? I think in Comox Valley, isn't one of the schools have a salad bar that's totally fed by local farmers?
Yes, they do. And that would be amazing in our community. Unfortunately, we don't have enough farmers growing vegetables to pull off something like that in all the schools. But this injection of funding, I think, is going to go more towards food that's sent home. So getting, fruit and vegetables into the backpacks of children that may need it on the weekend with their families.
I see. Okay. And then if you were to look out over the next year, where do you hope that the conversation is in the community a year from now?
A year from now, it is a slow thing to move the needle, unfortunately. Food security is, even that language, security and food together, it's not super accessible for everyone, and it does take some dialogue to really explain what the goal is. But I hope that in a year we have some more knowledge, even throughout just the nonprofit sector, about how we can make our programming more efficient and work together. So instead of, having one organization just go and buying all their food from a grocery store, instead working together with agencies that either can connect them to local food or can use rescued food, which we haven't touched on, but really interesting concept there too.
Yeah, and Loaves and Fishes in Nanaimo does the rescue food. I think they rescue food from, I think it's like 37 locations throughout Nanaimo, and they bring that food together and then they distribute it to 30 different locations throughout the island. So is that kind of the rescue food, is that not happening in Campbell River yet?
No, it's not the hub, but the Campbell River Food Bank actually rescues over 600,000 pounds of food every year. And that actually translates to $1.2 million worth of food.
Okay.
There's a formula that goes into that.
Right.
Don't ask me what
Yeah.
it is.
Oh, it's okay.
But with rising food costs, that number has gone up, obviously.
Yeah.
The food rescue is definitely happening. What we need is a facility to actually process that food. So 600,000 pounds is a lot.
That is a lot.
And some of that food, say, a block of cheese is cut into 4 pieces and distributed throughout families or agencies. But
Okay.
what we could do that's somewhat bigger is when we're rescuing things like tomatoes, onions.
You need an industrial kitchen to make
salsa
tomato sauce
or
and salsa.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
So food
All right.
rescue could become a much bigger
Okay.
part of our work if we had that facility.
And is that going to be one of your goals, is to champion that facility?
Yeah, so we're working
right.
on connecting. We're working on the education piece right now about how food rescue can be more than just distribution.
Right.
There's actually a lot of the food that actually goes to farmers to feed animals.
Okay.
So, and a lot of that food could be processed,
And yes, for human consumption.
Soft part of a
Yeah.
tomato just
Yeah.
gets thrown in. The whole tomato gets thrown in the bin, but
Yeah.
it could be cut off and it could be made into
Right.
something else.
If we had a processing facility. Okay. We will leave it there and we will catch up with you in 6 months and we'll see where that stands. Well, Madison, thank you so much for spending the time today and for at least touching on part of the education around what food security actually is and the food sovereignty that we need to be growing our own food and not importing so much. Not only because it's terrible for the climate, all of the trucks and all of the planes and all the ferry travel, like we really need stuff to be coming from down the road and not across the country or another country. So, and good luck integrating your current position with the new position and working with the new person who's going to be in the hub coordinator position. I'm really excited to see how this evolves because our communities and our people desperately need this. We really do. So thank you so much for spending the time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. You have been watching Upfront. I'm Mary Ruth Snyder. We've been coming to you live from the Shaw Spotlight Studios on Rob Braun Road in Campbell River. Please join us again.